The shrill, piercing scream was not the first sound to slice through the humid air of the Willow Creek Community Center that afternoon. But it was the one that made Amara Washington's blood run cold. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated terror. A child's cry that signaled not a scraped knee or a lost game, but something far worse. It was followed by a cacophony of gasps, the clatter of a metal ladle hitting the linoleum floor, and a deeper, guttural sob that she recognized with a lurch of her heart. Noah. Amara was on her feet before the second sob had fully registered, her chair scraping violently against the floor. The room, moments before a cheerful tableau of summer lunch, was now a frozen scene of horror. Faces were turned towards the serving line, a sea of stunned, open-mouthed expressions. She pushed through the throng, a low, urgent "excuse me" on her lips, her eyes scanning desperately for her nephews. And then she saw them. Leo, her older nephew, stood ramrod straight, his face a mask of white-hot fury and disbelief. He was shielding his younger brother, Noah, who was on his knees, howling. But it was the sight of the viscous, crimson liquid splattered across Noah's chest and arms, dripping onto the floor. That made Amara's breath catch in her throat. Tomato soup. Hot, steaming tomato soup. A large, overturned silver tureen lay on its side, its contents pooling like a wound on the white floor. Standing over them, a figure of righteous indignation, was a woman with a perfectly coiffed blonde bob and a face pinched with fury. Her hand was still outstretched, as if she had just completed the act of pushing the heavy pot. Her chest rose and fell with shallow, angry breaths. Time seemed to slow. Amara took in the details with the chilling clarity of a crime scene photograph. The steam rising from Noah's shirt, the flecks of basil and oregano clinging to his skin, the way the red liquid starkly contrasted with his brown arms, the absolute, unyielding lack of remorse on the woman's face. In that instant, Amara Washington, the fiercely private aunt who made pancakes on Saturdays and checked for monsters under the bed, ceased to exist. In her place stood Amara Washington, chief of the Juvenile Crime Prosecution Division for the county, a woman who had looked into the eyes of monsters far worse than this and had never once flinched. The cold, professional calm settled over her like a shroud. She walked forward, her steps measured and deliberate, the sound of her sensible heels clicking on the floor, the only sound in the now silent room. She knelt beside Noah, her hands hovering over his skin, feeling the radiating heat. "It's okay, baby," she whispered, her voice a low, steady anchor in the sea of chaos. "Auntie's here. Leo, go get Ms. Rodriguez. Now." Leo, jolted from his shock, ran. Amara looked up, her gaze locking with the blonde woman's. The woman's lips curled into a sneer. "He was stealing," she said, her voice shrill and defensive. "He already had his portion. These children need to learn that they can't just take whatever they want." Amara didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The quiet intensity in her eyes was more potent than any shout. "Stay right where you are," she said. The words perfectly articulated, each one a chip of ice. "Do not move." The command was not a request. It was an edict, delivered with the full weight of an authority the woman could not possibly comprehend. The woman, for the first time, seemed to falter, a flicker of uncertainty crossing her features as she stared into the unblinking, dark eyes of the woman who was about to dismantle her entire world. The life Amara had so carefully built in Willow Creek was one of quiet anonymity. It was a sanctuary, a deliberate departure from the grim realities of her professional life. Her days were spent in courtrooms and sterile office buildings, wading through the darkest currents of human behavior, dealing with the shattered lives of children caught in the crossfire of adult failures. Her evenings and weekends, however, belonged to Leo and Noah. They were her sister's legacy, a vibrant, noisy, and beautiful responsibility she had shouldered after a car accident had stolen their parents from them 2 years prior. Their home was not the meticulously curated, beige and white box favored by the neighborhood's homeowners association, but a place of controlled chaos, filled with the aroma of baking cookies, the sound of laughter, and the occasional thud of a stray soccer ball against a wall. Willow Creek was, on the surface, the suburban dream. Manicured lawns, identical mailboxes painted in HOA-approved shades of taupe, and an oppressive sense of order enforced by its notoriously zealous president, Karen Miller. Amara had learned early on to navigate the community's unspoken rules: bring the trash cans in by 6 p.m., never leave a garden hose visible from the street, and, for the love of God, do not paint your front door a non-sanctioned color. It was a small price to pay for the safety, the good schools, and the beautiful park where the boys could ride their bikes. The community center was the neighborhood's heart, a place where the sterile uniformity of Willow Creek gave way to a more genuine, diverse tapestry of life. It was run by the indefatigable Ms. Rodriguez, a woman with a kind smile and a fierce dedication to making every child feel welcome. It was here that Noah learned to finger paint and Leo discovered a love for chess. It was their safe space. Amara's first real brush with Karen Miller had happened a week before the soup incident, at the center's annual summer potluck. The event was a celebration of the community's diversity, a long table groaning under the weight of everything from tamales to tater tot casserole. Noah, with the boundless appetite of an 8-year-old, had gone back for a second brownie. Karen, who had been hovering near the dessert table like a hawk guarding its nest, had intercepted him. "That's quite enough. Young man," she'd said, her voice carrying across the room. "We need to make sure there's enough for everyone, not just for those who have no self-control." The comment was pointed, her eyes flicking towards Amara. Several parents shifted uncomfortably. Amara had walked over, placing a gentle hand on Noah's shoulder. She smiled at Karen, a cool, measured smile that didn't reach her eyes. "He's a growing boy." "Karen," she'd said, her voice pleasant but firm. "It's a potluck. The entire point is abundance." She had then picked up a brownie herself, handed it to Noah, and held Karen's gaze. Karen's face had tightened, her lips thinning into a bloodless line. She was not used to being challenged, especially not by a renter, a single black woman who didn't seem to grasp the established hierarchy of Willow Creek. She had turned away without another word, but the silent declaration of war had been unmistakable. Amara had felt it then, a low thrum of unease. She had underestimated the venom behind the perfectly maintained facade. She had treated Karen like a neighborhood nuisance, an annoyance to be managed. She had failed to recognize her for what she was: a predator, waiting for a moment of perceived weakness. Now, kneeling on the cold floor, the smell of cooked tomatoes and singed fabric filling her nostrils, Amara understood the depth of her miscalculation. "Ms." Rodriguez rushed over, her face pale with shock, followed by a frantic Leo carrying a first aid kit. "Oh my God! Noah! Ms." Rodriguez cried, her hands fluttering uselessly. "Call 911, Amara commanded, her voice cutting through the panic. "Tell them it's an assault. A juvenile victim with second-degree burns." She gently began to cut away Noah's shirt with a pair of safety scissors from the kit, her movements precise and practiced. The skin underneath was an angry, mottled red, already beginning to blister. Noah's cries had subsided into ragged, painful gasps. He trusted her. He knew she would fix this. And she would. She would fix this in a way that Karen Miller and all of Willow Creek would never forget. She looked up again at Karen, who was now surrounded by a few of her HOA cronies, her initial shock giving way to a renewed sense of defensive righteousness. "This is ridiculous," Karen was saying, her voice a loud bluster. "The boy is fine. He barely touched it. His parents are probably going to sue. It's what these people do." Amara's focus narrowed. The world fell away, leaving only her injured child, and the woman who had harmed him. "You did this," Amara said, her voice low and dangerous. "You hurt a child. Over a bowl of soup?" "He was stealing food from the community," Karen retorted, puffing out her chest. Amara almost laughed, a bitter, humorless sound. "This isn't about soup, Karen. This is about power. And you are about to learn a very hard lesson about what real power looks like." The distant wail of a siren began to grow, a fitting soundtrack to the promise she was making to herself, to her nephews, and to the woman who had just ignited a fire she had no idea how to quench. The system Karen so smugly believed she ruled was about to be turned against her, wielded by a woman who knew its every lever and every hidden pressure point. The quiet life of Aunt Amara was over. The chief was on the clock. The days that followed were a blur of antiseptic smells, hushed doctors' consultations, and the quiet, constant hum of Leo's anxiety. Noah's burns were second-degree, painful and requiring meticulous care, but the doctors assured Amara he would heal without significant scarring. The physical wounds, however, were only part of the damage. Noah, once a boisterous, carefree boy, was now quiet and withdrawn, flinching at loud noises and sudden movements. He had nightmares that left him screaming, his small body drenched in sweat. Leo, in turn, had become hypervigilant, a pint-sized bodyguard who refused to let his little brother out of his sight. He was filled with a silent, simmering rage that worried Amara more than Noah's tears. Amara moved with the methodical precision of a general planning a campaign. She took a leave of absence from work, citing a family medical emergency. Her colleagues, aware of her fierce privacy, asked no questions, simply offering their unconditional support. Her first call was to Detective Miller, a seasoned, no-nonsense cop she'd worked with for over a decade. He wasn't related to Karen, a coincidence Amara found grimly ironic. An assault at a community center, Miller had asked over the phone, his voice laced with professional concern. "Victims a minor." "Two of them," Amara corrected, her voice flat. "My nephews. David." She threw a tureen of hot soup on my 8-year-old. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. Amara didn't need to embellish. The bare facts were horrifying enough. "I want a full investigation," she continued, her tone shifting from that of a friend to that of a prosecutor. "I want witness statements from everyone in that room. I want the community center's CCTV footage pulled. I want a warrant for the tureen and the suspect's clothing. And I want you to handle the interviews with my boys. Someone they won't be afraid of." "Amara, you know I'll do it by the book," Miller assured her. "Are you okay?" "I will be," she said, the words a vow, once she's in custody. While Miller's team began methodically building the criminal case, Karen Miller launched her counteroffensive. She was a master of leveraging the petty tyrannies of suburban life. An emergency HOA meeting was called. The email notification sent to the entire Willow Creek mailing list. The subject line read, "Urgent addressing security and behavioral issues at the community center." It was a thinly veiled attack, a strategic move to reframe the narrative from one of an adult assaulting a child to one of problem children, threatening the community's safety. Then came the official notice, taped to Amara's front door. It was a formal letter from the HOA, citing a violation of the community's bylaws. It listed creating a public disturbance and failure to supervise minors, leading to property damage and unsafe conditions. It was filled with legal-sounding jargon designed to intimidate, mentioning fines and the possibility of recommending the termination of her lease to her landlord. Karen was trying to make her homeless. Amara read the letter, a cold fury building within her. This was predictable. It was the bully's classic move: escalate, intimidate, and overwhelm. But Karen had made a critical error. She was trying to fight a legal battle with a woman who didn't just know the law. She embodied it. Amara documented the letter, photographed it, and filed it away in the growing dossier she was building. The next escalation came 2 days later. It was more insidious, more cruel. 2 women in neat, professional attire knocked on her door. They were from Child Protective Services. An anonymous tip, they explained gently, had been called in. Allegations of neglect, unsafe living conditions, uncontrolled, aggressive children. Amara felt a wave of nausea. This was a line she hadn't expected Karen to cross. To use the very system designed to protect children as a weapon against them was a new level of depravity. She maintained her composure, her face an unreadable mask. "Of course," she said, her voice betraying no emotion. "Please, come in. My nephews are in the living room." The social workers were thorough but kind. They saw the clean, loving home. They saw the meticulously cared-for bandages on Noah's arm. They saw Leo's protective stance and Noah's fearful eyes. They interviewed the boys separately, with the gentle expertise of their profession. Amara sat at her kitchen table, her hands clenched into fists beneath the table, listening to the muffled sounds of her family being forced to defend themselves against a phantom accusation. The visit felt like a violation, a stain on the sanctuary she had tried so hard to create. After an hour, the lead social worker, a woman named Ms. Evans, closed her notebook. "Ms. Washington," she said, her expression one of weary sympathy. "It's clear to us that these allegations are completely unfounded. Your home is a wonderful environment, and you are clearly a devoted guardian. I'm sorry you were put through this." "I understand you have to follow up on every call," Amara said, her voice tight. Ms. Evans hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. "Off the record," she said, lowering her voice slightly. "We've had a number of calls from this neighborhood recently, all anonymous, all targeting families with, well, with a bit more melanin than the local average, or families who receive financial assistance to use the community center. Every single one of them has been unsubstantiated. It's a pattern of harassment. We can't prove where the calls are coming from, but my money would be on someone with a grudge and a position of power on the HOA board." The words hung in the air. This wasn't just a personal vendetta against Amara. It was a systemic campaign of bigotry, waged by Karen against anyone who didn't fit her narrow, sterile vision of Willow Creek. Karen wasn't just a bully. She was a gatekeeper, using her petty power to try and purge the community of its diversity. A new, colder anger settled in Amara's gut. Karen Miller had attacked her family. She had tried to have them evicted. She had weaponized the child welfare system against them. She had underestimated Amara at every turn, viewing her as just another victim to be bulldozed. But now, something had shifted. The information from Ms. Evans was more than just another piece of the puzzle. It was a key. It suggested a pattern of behavior, a desperation that went beyond simple prejudice. People who were this aggressive, this willing to cross every line, were often hiding something. Her prosecutor's instincts, long dormant in her personal life, flared to life. This was no longer just about getting justice for Noah. It was about dismantling Karen Miller's entire corrupt empire. Amara thanked Ms. Evans, who closed the file and left. As the door clicked shut, Amara walked to her home office. She sat down at her desk. The file on Karen Miller spread before her. The witness statements painted a clear picture of the assault. The HOA violation notice was evidence of malicious harassment. The unfounded CPS report was a testament to her depravity. But Ms. Evans' words had opened up a new avenue of inquiry, a pattern of harassment, a desperation to maintain control. What was Karen so afraid of? What was she protecting? Amara picked up her phone and called Detective Miller. "David," she said, her voice low and focused. "I need a favor. I have a theory I want to run by you. It's bigger than the assault. I think our HOA president might be hiding more than just a rotten soul. I think she might be hiding a crime." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Amara could almost hear the gears turning in Miller's head. "Tell me everything," he said. The hunt was on. The midpoint twist arrived not with a dramatic flourish, but in the sterile, data-driven world of public records and financial statements. Acting on Amara's hunch, Detective Miller had, through completely legal and proper channels, subpoenaed the Willow Creek Homeowners Association's financial records for the past 5 years. An HOA is, after all, a non-profit corporation. Its books are supposed to be open to its members. But Karen had always managed to obfuscate, presenting slick but ultimately meaningless summary reports at annual meetings, citing privacy concerns or the complexity of the documents to fend off any detailed inquiries. Now, under the unblinking eye of a forensic accountant Miller had assigned to the case, the numbers began to tell their own sordid story. Miller called Amara a week after the CPS visit. "You were right," he said, his voice grim. "It's not just smoke. The whole damn house is on fire." Amara was in her kitchen, watching Noah carefully draw a picture of a superhero who could shoot healing rays from his hands. "What did you find?" she asked, her voice quiet, trying not to alert the boys. "For the past 4 years, there have been exorbitant recurring payments to a vendor called Evergreen Landscape Solutions. We're talking nearly $250,000. "For mowing lawns and trimming hedges?" Amara asked, skepticism heavy in her tone. "Exactly," Miller said. "The payments are way out of line with industry standards. But here's the kicker. Evergreen Landscape Solutions was incorporated 5 years ago. It has no website, no business address other than a P.O. box. No other clients we can find. It's a ghost." Amara's mind raced, connecting the dots. A shell corporation. "You got it. We dug into the incorporation papers. The registered agent is a man named Gregory Finch. A quick background check shows that Gregory Finch is Karen Miller's brother-in-law. He's got a record, too. A couple of minor fraud charges from a decade ago." There it was. The secret that changed everything. The piece that made all of Karen's frantic, venomous behavior click into place. It wasn't just about racism or a pathological need for control, though those were certainly components of her personality. It was about greed, Karen's reign of terror, her obsession with rules, her harassment of anyone who might ask too many questions. It was all a cover. It was a desperate, elaborate defense mechanism designed to protect her criminal enterprise. She was systematically looting the community she claimed to be protecting, funneling HOA dues into her own family's pockets. "Her attack on Noah," Amara began, the realization dawning on her, "wasn't just a racist outburst." Miller finished for her. "It was the panic of a cornered animal. You challenged her authority at the potluck. You stood up to her. In her mind, you became a threat. Someone who wasn't intimidated, who might start looking closer, who might rally other residents. When your son, an innocent kid, defied her by taking a second ladle of soup, she saw it as another challenge to her absolute control. she snapped. She wasn't just punishing a child. She was trying to terrorize a potential threat into submission. The cold, hard truth of it settled in Amara's chest. Karen Miller had been willing to physically harm a child, to try and get a family evicted, to file a false CPS report, all to protect her flow of stolen money. The revelation transformed the case. This was no longer just an aggravated assault on a minor. It was felony embezzlement, wire fraud, and conspiracy. Karen wasn't just a neighborhood tyrant. She was a common criminal, wrapped in the respectable veneer of suburban leadership. This new knowledge solidified Amara's strategy. A quiet arrest would not be enough. Justice for Noah required more than just a conviction. The community, the one Karen had gaslighted, bullied, and stolen from, needed to see the truth. They needed to witness the fall of the queen from her castle of lies. Karen herself had provided the perfect stage for her own downfall. The emergency HOA meeting she had called to slander Amara's family. It was scheduled for the following Tuesday at the community center, the very scene of her initial crime. It was meant to be her victory lap, the moment she cemented her power by publicly shaming and ostracizing the family that dared to defy her. Instead, Amara decided it would be her grand finale. "David," Amara said, her voice now filled with a chilling resolve. "The warrants. How soon can you have them?" "For the assault. They're ready to go. For the financial crimes. The DA's office wants to build a slightly more ironclad case. But given the evidence, I can get a provisional warrant for embezzlement based on what we have. It'll be enough to make the arrest." "Good," Amara said. "Hold off on serving them. I have an idea. The HOA meeting is on Tuesday night at 7 o'clock in the main hall of the community center." There was a long pause as Miller understood her implication. "Amara, a public arrest like that. It can get messy." "She made this public," Amara countered, her voice like steel. "She dragged my family, my children, through the mud in a public forum. She called this meeting to humiliate us. She deserves to be exposed in front of the very people she has been victimizing for years. Justice needs to be seen to be done. Let her have her stage. Let her have her audience. We'll just be writing a different ending to her little play." Miller was quiet for a moment longer. Then, he let out a low whistle. "Okay, Chief," he said, a note of grim respect in his voice. "The theater of justice it is. We'll be there. Just give us the cue." Amara hung up the phone. She looked over at Noah, who was now holding up his drawing for her to see. The superhero on the page was a boy with brown skin and a determined look on his face, a bright red N emblazoned on his chest. He was standing over a cowering, cartoonish villain with a shock of blonde hair. From the hero's hands, beams of golden light shot out, enveloping the villain in a cage of pure energy. Amara smiled, a genuine, hopeful smile for the first time in weeks. "I love it, Noah," she said, her voice soft. "He looks very, very powerful." The stage was set. The players were in position. The climax was coming. The main hall of the Willow Creek Community Center was thick with a palpable tension. The air, usually filled with the cheerful echoes of children's games, was stagnant and heavy, smelling of stale coffee and collective anxiety. Nearly 100 residents were packed into the rows of plastic chairs, their faces a mixture of curiosity, anger, and apprehension. Karen's cronies, a tight-lipped group of women who served as her unofficial cabinet, sat in the front row, their expressions smug and expectant. In the back, a larger group of residents stood, arms crossed, their faces grim. These were the families who had felt the sting of Karen's selective enforcement, the ones who had been fined for weeds or cited for holiday decorations left up a day too long. They were the silent, resentful majority. Amara sat in the third row, an island of calm in the turbulent sea. Leo sat beside her, his jaw tight, his hand resting protectively on his mother's arm as he saw his brother. Noah was not with them. Amara had arranged for him to stay with a trusted friend, shielding him from this final, ugly chapter. Ms. Rodriguez, the center's director, stood near the side door, her expression worried but resolute. She had given Amara a key to the audiovisual room earlier, a small act of solidarity. At precisely 7 o'clock, Karen Miller walked to the podium at the front of the room. She was dressed in a severe navy blue suit, a string of pearls clasped around her neck. She looked out at the assembled crowd, a practiced, concerned look on her face. She tapped the microphone, the sharp sound causing several people to jump. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," she began, her voice resonating with false sincerity. "I know we'd all rather be at home with our families. But we are facing a crisis in our community, a crisis of safety, of values, of respect for the rules that keep Willow Creek the wonderful place it is to live." She paused, letting her words hang in the air. She didn't look at Amara, but her intent was clear. "As you know, there was an unfortunate incident here last week, an incident that has been wildly misrepresented by certain parties looking for a quick payday." A murmur went through the crowd. Amara remained perfectly still, her face impassive. "The truth," Karen continued, her voice rising with theatrical fervor, "is that our community center, a place we all fund with our hard-earned money, is being threatened by a lack of discipline, by families who do not share our values, by children who are allowed to run wild, unsupervised, stealing food and creating a hostile environment for everyone else." This was her narrative, the one she had been carefully crafting all week. She was the victim, the protector of the community, and Amara's family were the dangerous outsiders. "I have been your HOA president for 6 years," she declared, placing a hand over her heart. "And, in all that time, I have had one goal: to protect our property values and our quality of life. That is why the board is proposing 2 immediate actions tonight. First, a formal review of the community center's charter, with the goal of restructuring its programs to serve residents who respect our rules. Second, we will be voting on a resolution to formally petition the landlord of the family responsible for this chaos, to terminate their lease for repeated violations of our bylaws." Gasps rippled through the room. This was it. The public execution. Karen was asking the community to sanction the eviction of a single mother and her 2 young nephews. Karen's eyes finally landed on Amara, a flicker of triumphant malice in them. "It is time," she said, her voice ringing with finality, "for us to take a stand and say that this behavior will not be tolerated in Willow Creek." She raised a gavel, preparing to call for the vote. "Point of order, Madam President." The voice was calm, clear, and cut through Karen's righteous monologue like a surgeon's scalpel. Every head in the room turned. Amara Washington was on her feet. She hadn't raised her voice, yet she commanded the complete attention of the room. Karen's face tightened. "This is not a debate. Ms. Washington, you are not a member of the board." "I am a member of this community," Amara replied, her voice steady. "And you have just publicly accused my family of theft and my children of being a danger. I believe that affords me the right to respond." A man in the back yelled, "Let her speak!" Another voice joined in. Then another. The silent majority was finding its voice. Karen, flustered by the unexpected resistance, hesitated. Denying Amara the right to speak would make her look weak. Tyrannical. "Fine," she snapped, her voice dripping with disdain. "You have 2 minutes." Amara walked slowly to the front of the room. Not to the podium, but to the open space beside it, placing herself on the same level as the residents. She turned to face them, her expression serious and direct. "My name is Amara Washington. I am Leo and Noah's aunt and legal guardian. A little over a week ago, in this very room, my 8-year-old nephew, Noah, had hot soup thrown on him by Ms. Miller. He suffered second-degree burns." She paused, letting the stark reality of her words sink in. The reason he had gone back for a second helping of soup at a community potluck. Ms. Miller accused him of stealing. That is the unfortunate incident she refers to. She then turned her gaze directly to Karen. "You didn't just assault a child. Karen, you lied about it. You tried to have my family evicted, and when that didn't work, you filed a false, anonymous report with Child Protective Services, an act of malicious cruelty that I cannot even begin to comprehend." Karen's face went white. "That's a lie. I did no such thing." "Is it?" Amara asked, her voice dangerously quiet. She held up her phone, pressing a button. A file she had prepared began to project onto the large screen behind Karen, the same screen usually used for movie nights. It was a timeline. Date of assault. Date of HOA violation notice. Date of the anonymous CPS call, with a note from the investigator about a pattern of similar calls from the neighborhood. The murmuring in the crowd grew louder, more confused. "You see," Amara continued, her voice gaining strength, "I started to wonder why. Why would an HOA president be so threatened by a single mother and her 2 boys? What could possibly make you so desperate, so vicious?" And then I realized, it was never about us. It was about you. It was about what you were afraid I might find if I started asking questions. She clicked the button again. The timeline vanished, replaced by a spreadsheet. It was the HOA's financial ledger. Highlighted in bright yellow was a line item, Evergreen Landscape Solutions. "For the last 4 years, you, Ms. Miller, have approved payments totaling over $240,000 of our HOA dues to this company." The crowd gasped. The number was stunning. "The problem is," Amara said, her voice dropping as she delivered the fatal blow, "Evergreen Landscape Solutions doesn't exist. It's a shell corporation. A front for you to funnel our money into your own pockets. A front registered to your brother-in-law, a man with a prior conviction for fraud." She clicked one last time. The incorporation documents for Evergreen Landscape Solutions appeared on the screen, with Gregory Finch's name clearly visible as the registered agent. Then, beside it, a photo of Karen and her family at a holiday party, her arm slung cheerfully around the same Gregory Finch. The room erupted. The smug looks on the faces of Karen's cronies had dissolved into horror. The rest of the residents were on their feet, shouting, pointing. Karen stood frozen at the podium, her face a grotesque mask of disbelief and terror. The carefully constructed world of Karen Miller had just been demolished in front of a live audience. You can't prove any of this," she stammered, her voice a pathetic squeak. "Oh, I think we can," Amara said softly. As if on cue, the main doors at the back of the hall swung open. 2 uniformed police officers stepped inside, followed by the familiar, grim-faced figure of Detective David Miller. He held a sheaf of papers in his hand. The entire room fell silent, a collective intake of breath. The residents parted like the Red Sea as the detective and the officers walked down the central aisle. They didn't stop until they reached the podium. Detective Miller looked at the stunned, ashen-faced woman before him. "Karen Miller," he said, his voice loud and clear in the cavernous silence. You are under arrest for 2 counts of aggravated assault on a minor. You are also under arrest for felony embezzlement and wire fraud." One of the officers stepped forward and instructed Karen to turn around and place her hands behind her back. The sharp, metallic click of the handcuffs being fastened echoed through the hall. It was the sound of justice, the sound of an era of petty tyranny coming to an abrupt and definitive end. Karen Miller, the Queen of Willow Creek, was led away in handcuffs, her face streaked with tears of pure, impotent rage. Through the crowd of neighbors she had once ruled, bullied, and stolen from. Amara stood quietly, watching her go, her expression not of triumph, but of profound, weary relief. The climax was over. The healing could now begin. The aftermath of Karen Miller's public downfall was swift and decisive. The news spread through Willow Creek like wildfire, first in hushed, shocked whispers, then in a torrent of community-wide emails and social media posts. The story was too shocking, too cinematic to remain local for long. By the end of the week, it had been picked up by regional news outlets, complete with grainy cell phone footage of a handcuffed Karen being led out of the community center. The headline was irresistible. Suburban HOA president arrested for assaulting child, embezzling $250,000. The HOA board, composed entirely of Karen's hand-picked allies, dissolved within 48 hours. Its members resigned in disgrace, issuing a collective, fumbling apology to the community for their lack of oversight. The community's bank accounts were frozen pending a full forensic audit, which would eventually reveal the true extent of Karen's theft to be closer to $300,000. In the vacuum of power, something remarkable happened. The residents, once divided and intimidated, began to come together. Ms. Rodriguez, emboldened by the turn of events, organized an impromptu town hall. It was not a meeting of anger and recrimination, but one of constructive purpose. People who had lived on the same street for years, but had never spoken beyond a polite nod, were now engaged in animated conversation. Mr. Henderson, an elderly retiree whom Karen had relentlessly fined for the color of his garden gnomes, stood up and spoke eloquently about the need for transparency and kindness. Families that had been targeted by Karen's anonymous CPS calls found each other, sharing their stories and finding solidarity in their shared experience. An interim board was elected, a diverse group of men and women, including renters and new residents, who were committed to rewriting the HOA's draconian bylaws and fostering a genuine sense of community. For Amara, the days that followed were a return to a quieter, more personal form of justice. She gave her official statement to Detective Miller and Leo, with a courage that made her heart ache with pride, gave his. The case against Karen was ironclad, faced with overwhelming evidence, the testimony of dozens of witnesses to the assault, the undeniable paper trail of the embezzlement, and the threat of further charges related to the malicious CPS reports. Karen Miller accepted a plea bargain. She pled guilty to all charges to avoid a drawn-out, humiliating public trial. Amara, Leo, and Noah were at home, building a complex Lego castle in the living room, when Detective Miller called with the news. "She'll be sentenced next month," he said. "The prosecutor is recommending 7 to 10 years in state prison, plus full financial restitution to the HOA. She'll never hold a position of public trust again." "Thank you, David," Amara said, a weight she hadn't fully realized she was carrying lifting from her shoulders. "For everything." She hung up the phone and looked at her boys. Leo was concentrating, carefully placing a tiny Lego flag on the highest tower. Noah was directing the placement of a Lego knight, making quiet swoosh sounds as he moved it through the air. The physical scars on his arm had faded to a pale pink, barely noticeable unless you knew where to look. The emotional scars were healing, too, slowly but surely. The nightmares were less frequent, and the sound of his laughter once again filled their home. He was drawing superheroes again, but now they were working together, building things instead of fighting villains. That fall, the revitalized Willow Creek community held a Unity BBQ on the great lawn behind the community center. The oppressive list of rules that had once governed such gatherings was gone. There were blankets of every color, music from a dozen different portable speakers, and the air was filled with the delicious, mingled scents of grilled hot dogs, spicy curries, and sweet cornbread. The new HOA had used some of its initial, untainted funds to plant a new garden, and children of all ages were taking turns watering the nascent flowers. Amara was there, not as a prosecutor or a community activist, but simply as Aunt Amara. She laughed as she watched Leo engage in a serious game of chess with Mr. Henderson, the man with the liberated garden gnomes. She cheered as Noah, his face beaming, won a three-legged race with a new friend. Ms. Rodriguez came and sat beside her on the grass, handing her a plate of food. "Look at this, Ms." Rodriguez said, her voice soft with wonder, gesturing at the vibrant, joyful scene. "It's like the whole neighborhood can finally breathe." "It took a storm to clear the air," Amara replied, watching Noah run, free and unafraid, across the grass. She felt a profound sense of peace settle over her. Justice had been served, not just in a courtroom, but here, on this lawn, in the simple, powerful act of a community reclaiming its heart. She had used the formidable power of her profession to protect her family, but in doing so, had inadvertently liberated an entire neighborhood. She had learned that the line between her two worlds, the professional and the personal, was not a wall to be defended, but a bridge to be crossed when necessary. Her strength as a prosecutor was not separate from her love as an aunt. They were two sides of the same coin, two facets of the same unwavering commitment to protect the innocent. A cool autumn breeze rustled the leaves of the oak trees overhead. Noah ran back to her, his face flushed with happiness, and threw his arms around her neck. "I love our home," he said, his voice muffled against her shoulder. Amara held him tight, her eyes closing as she soaked in the moment. The sound of laughter, the smell of barbecue, the feeling of her nephew's small, strong arms around her. This was the resolution. This was the victory. Not the click of handcuffs or the pronouncement of a sentence, but this. A community healed, a family made whole, a future, bright and full of promise, stretching out before them. Justice, she thought, was not just the punishment of the wicked, but the restoration of peace for the good. And here, in the heart of Willow Creek, peace had finally returned.